right now inside your skull. I mean, an actual electrical storm is raging at hundreds of miles per hour. Microscopic sparks are, leaping across billions of tiny gaps.
Yeah, and firing in a sequence so perfectly orchestrated that it allows you to decipher the exact sounds coming out of my mouth right now.
Right, and that biological storm isn't just helping you hear.
No, it's actively retrieving your memory of what language even is.
Yeah.
It's maintaining your posture, regulating your breathing, and, well, perhaps making you wonder where this exact conversation is going.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at the ultimate how-to manual of that exact storm inside your head. We're pulling foundational concepts from the absolute cornerstone text in the field, Principles of Neuroscience.
It really is the Bible of the field.
Exactly. And our mission today is pretty ambitious. We want to understand the central theme of this massive text, which is how the microscopic physical stuff in our heads, the actual cells and molecules, creates our thoughts.
The mental processes, the complex behaviors, all of it.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this, because before we zoom in on the microscopic details of, say, a single cell, we really need to understand the massive conceptual bridge this textbook built. Help lay the groundwork for us here.
Sure.
Why is this specific text considered the undisputed heavyweight champion of understanding ourselves?
Well, to really appreciate it, you have to look at the historical divide in how we studied human beings. For centuries, science and philosophy treated the mind and the brain as fundamentally separate jurisdictions.
Right, like two totally different worlds.
Exactly. You had psychology over here studying the mind, emotions, cognition, basically the invisible software of human existence.
The abstract stuff, the realm of the invisible.
Yes. And completely siloed away from that, you had biology and anatomy studying the brain.
Yeah.
The physical structure, the hardware, the squishy 3-pound organ itself.
Right, the wetware.
Exactly. And the prevailing thought was that the mind just sort of floated above the brain, loosely tethered to it, but ultimately made of some totally different intangible substance.
Wow, so they weren't even really talking to each other.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And what Principles of Neuroscience did was permanently demolish that wall. Its primary scientific achievement was firmly and, frankly, unapologetically connecting biological structure directly to cognitive function.
It's like we used to have the architects who only studied the blueprints and the raw materials of a house. And then you had the sociologists who only studied the wild party happening inside the house.
That is a really great way to put it.
And this field finally puts them in the exact same room, forcing them to realize they are looking at the exact same event.
What's fascinating here is that it goes a step further than just putting them in the same room. It establishes that the party literally cannot exist without the house.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the mind is an emergent property of the brain. And the text does this through a strictly interdisciplinary blueprint.
Right.
It insists that you cannot understand human nature without combining anatomy, so the physical structures, with physiology, how those structures function in real time, and molecular biology.
The tiny chemical building block.
That's exactly.
Wait, let me push back a bit, because if the mind is purely an emergent property of biology, aren't we just, reducing art, love, and human experience to cold chemical math?
It's a very common concern.
How does a textbook like this deal with the deeply subjective experience of actually feeling something?
That is the central tension of the entire field, and it's a really great point to raise. The book doesn't claim that the subjective feeling of love is entirely captured by a mathematical equation on a page.
Right.
What it argues is that the capacity for that feeling, the biological mechanism that actually allows you to experience it, is entirely physical.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think about a complex disorder like schizophrenia. If you only look at psychology, you observe the symptoms, the altered perception of reality.
Or the behavior.
And if you only look at gross anatomy, the physical brain might actually look relatively normal. But when you combine them with physiology and molecular biology, you start to see the real issue.
What do you see?
You see that it's an issue with specific neurotransmitter systems, like dopamine, firing incorrectly in very specific anatomical pathways. You literally cannot see the full picture unless you overlay all three disciplines.
So it's looking at the house's layout, the electricity running through its wires, and the actual atoms of the drywall, all at the exact same time to figure out why the lights keep flickering.
Precisely.
To understand the mind, you absolutely must understand the physical biology, which I guess naturally forces us to look at the physical space where this happens.
The anatomy.
Yeah, if anatomy is the foundation of the mind, we have to talk about the architecture of this system, because from the outside, the brain just looks like a uniform wrinkled walnut.
It really does.
But it's not a homogeneous blob of tissue, is it?
Not at all. The high-level organization of the nervous system is breathtakingly specific.
Oh.
Well, it is an intricately organized network where different regions are highly specialized for different tasks. We have specific areas dedicated to processing visual information, totally separate areas for understanding language, others for executing physical movement.
But wait, if the brain is mostly made up of the exact same basic building blocks, these cells called neurons, why does the high-level organization matter so much?
That is the key question.
I mean, is the nervous system more like a rigid, pre-planned city grid where every road has a strict, unchangeable purpose? Or is it more like a wild, tangled jumble of vine just growing wherever they want?
It's basically a highly structured grid that allows for jungle-like growth within its borders. But the foundational organization is everything.
Okay.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, a single neuron sitting in isolation in a petri dish does not know how to see the color red. It doesn't know how to hear a middle C on a piano.
It's just a tiny biological battery waiting for a circuit.
Precisely. It has no cognitive function on its own whatsoever. It is the specific anatomical arrangement and the precise routing of these pathways that actually create the function.
Okay, can you give me an example of that routing?
Sure, let's look at your sense of touch. There is a specific strip of tissue across the top of your brain called the somatosensory cortex.
The somatosensory cortex.
Right. And it contains a literal topographical map of your entire body.
Wait, a physical map? Like there's a specific millimeter of tissue for my left thumb and a totally different one for my right elbow.
Exactly. It's called the homunculus.
The homunculus. Yeah.
And what's really fascinating is that the map isn't drawn to scale based on your actual body size. It's drawn based on sensitivity.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the area of brain tissue dedicated to processing feeling in your lips and fingertips is massive compared to the area dedicated to the middle of your back.
Because we need way more sensory input there.
Exactly. The organization is fiercely specific. The reason you see light when you open your eyes isn't because the neurons in your visual cortex are somehow magically visual neurons.
Right.
The biological hardware of a neuron in your visual cortex is virtually identical to a neuron in your auditory cortex.
Wait, really? That completely breaks my intuition. You're saying the cells that process the sight of a sunset are fundamentally the exact same type of cells that process the sound of a symphony?
Yes, entirely. The difference is entirely in the routing.
The routing.
Right. The neurons in your visual cortex happen to be wired to the photoreceptors in the back of your eye. The neurons in your auditory cortex are wired to the hair cells deep inside your ear. Organization is the function.
Okay, so the hardware is universal, but its location and its specific hookup determine our entire reality.
Exactly.
So if I rerouted the wires from my eyes to my auditory cortex, I would theoretically hear the sunset.
Conceptually, yes, and neuroplasticity experiments in animals have actually shown exactly that kind of sensory substitution.
That is why...
It is. That's why the architecture is paramount. Damage a specific neighborhood in this city grid, and you lose a highly specific ability, like the ability to recognize faces, while your ability to read a book remains completely intact.
Okay, so we have this incredibly detailed map of specialized neighborhoods in the brain, but a map doesn't explain how the residents talk to each other.
No, it doesn't.
How does a signal actually get from the vision neighborhood to the muscle neighborhood so you can catch a flying baseball? A static structure doesn't generate a thought. We have to look at the dynamic action.
Exactly right. Anatomy is only half the story. The other half is physiology. And that brings us to the absolute core of neuroscience, which is neural signaling.
To language of the brain.
Yes, this is the mechanism by which information travels through that vast city grid. And it doesn't happen by magic. It happens through very precise, measurable cellular and molecular mechanisms.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the scale and the speed of this communication are almost incomprehensible. We're talking about 86 billion neurons.
Yes, 86 billion. And each one of those neurons can connect to up to 10,000 other neurons.
That is a lot of connection.
You have more synaptic connections in your head right now than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy.
Wow.
And a single neuron can fire its signal up to 1,000 times per second.
So how does the signal actually travel? We always hear it described as an electrical impulse, like a current traveling down a copper wire in a house.
Right.
But I know that textbook tells us that's not biologically accurate.
No, it's a common but pretty flawed misconception. Neurons don't conduct electricity like a copper wire does. The signal, which is called an action potential, is more like a microscopic stadium wave performed by
It's a
ions.
stadium wave. Okay, paint that picture for me.
So the neuron's outer membrane has tiny protein gates. When the cell gets stimulated, the first gate opens, letting positively charged sodium ions rush into the cell.
Okay.
This sudden shift in charge triggers the very next gate to open, which triggers the next, cascading all the way down the length of the cell.
So it's an active rolling wave of chemical gates opening and closing, not just a passive zap of electricity.
Exactly. It's a self-propagating electrochemical wave. But here is the massive logistical problem the brain has to solve.
What's that?
Neurons don't physically touch each other.
Right.
There is a microscopic gap between the end of one neuron and the beginning of the next. That gap is called a synapse.
The road ends, the stadium wave hits a brick wall.
Basically, yeah.
So how does the message cross the void?
To cross that gap, the cell has to fundamentally translate the signal. It changes from an electrical wave into a chemical messenger.
Oh, I see.
When that action potential reaches the end of the line, it forces the neuron to spit out tiny molecules called neurotransmitters right into that gap.
I usually picture this like a relay race where runners are passing a physical baton.
It's less like passing a baton and more like throwing a highly specific key across a moat.
Throwing a key across a moat. I like that.
The first neuron throws thousands of these chemical keys across the synapse. They drift across the gap and fit perfectly into specific locks, or receptors, on the surface of the second neuron.
And then what happens?
When the key turns the lock, it physically opens the gates on that second neuron. Sodium rushes in, and a brand new electrical stadium wave begins.
Electrical wave, chemical keys across the moat, electrical wave, over and over. And this is happening thousands of times a second just for me to nod my head to what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. But it's not just about turning things on. There's a whole other side to this chemical vocabulary.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some of those chemical keys are excitatory, meaning they yell fire, but others are inhibitory.
Inhibitory.
They fit into locks that actually make the next neuron less likely to fire. They yell stop.
So a single neuron might be receiving thousands of keys at the exact same milliseconds, some yelling fire and some yelling stop.
Exactly right. And that single neuron acts like a microscopic calculator. It adds up all the fire signals, subtracts the stop signals, and if the total reaches a specific threshold, it triggers its own stadium wave.
That is incredible.
That incredibly fast microscopic map is the basis of all human decision-making. And what is most profound about this is that this mechanism is the fundamental universal language of the brain.
The universal language.
Yes, the exact same mechanism is what is happening when you solve a complex calculus problem or when you feel the crushing weight of heartbreak.
So when we talk about learning something new, like, I don't know, practicing a chord on a guitar, we aren't just downloading software into an invisible mind. We are physically changing that moat.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That is neuroplasticity at the molecular level.
Right.
When you practice that guitar chord over and over, you are firing that specific sequence of neurons repeatedly.
Right.
The textbook outlines mechanisms like long-term potentiation, which essentially means that cells that fire together wire together.
Fire together, wire together. I've heard that.
By repeatedly throwing those keys across that specific moat, the second neuron physically builds more locks to catch them. The physical connection between those two cells literally thickens and becomes more efficient.
My mind is literally altering the physical shape of my brain. The act of thinking changes the architecture.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so we have the architecture, the city grid, we understand the traffic, the rolling electrical waves, and the chemical keys crossing the moats, physically changing the landscape as they go. So what does this all mean for you and me?
Right.
How do we scale this up? Because it's one thing to say a neurotransmitter crosses a synapse.
Yes.
But how do we get from a crossing a tiny gap to me deciding to drink this cup of coffee or me feeling a sudden, vivid wave of nostalgia about my 7th birthday party?
This raises an important question, and it is the exact question that Principles of Neuroscience ultimately seeks to answer. How do molecular mechanisms generate complex behavior?
Right, the ultimate puzzle.
The answer lies in the concept of emergence.
Emergence. We touched on this earlier with the house party analogy, but let's really break down the mechanism.
Think of a single molecule of water, H2O. If you study that single molecule under the most powerful microscope, you can learn everything about its chemical bonds, its mass, its atomic structure.
Sure, all the physical properties.
But nowhere in that single molecule will you find the property of wetness. Wetness, or the power of a tsunami, doesn't exist at the level of a single molecule.
Right, one molecule isn't a puddle. You can't surf on one molecule.
Exactly. But when you bring billions of water molecules together under the right conditions, they interact in a way that creates an entirely new property, wetness.
A tidal wave, a whirlpool.
Yes. Those phenomena are emergent properties. They emerge purely from the complex interaction of simple parts.
So a single neuron isn't conscious. A single synapse doesn't hold the memory of my birthday party.
Exactly right. A single neuron is a relatively simple machine. It has a binary function. It either fires its signal or it doesn't, on or off.
Like a switch.
Right. It has no inner life. But when you have 86 billion of these neurons, connected by trillions of synapses, firing in perfectly choreographed sequences across a highly structured anatomical grid, well, complex behavior emerges.
Thought emerges.
Consciousness emerges. It's the difference between studying a single thread and looking at a massive, complex tapestry.
It's a beautiful way to put it.
A single thread doesn't contain a picture of a landscape, but weave billions of them together in a specific pattern, and the landscape emerges.
It is a vast biological chorus. One voice singing a single note is just a tone. But billions of voices singing perfectly synchronized, shifting melodies creates a symphony.
And the symphony is us. The text shows us definitively that the molecular mechanisms are the machine and the machine is us.
Wow.
Every mood you have is a shift in the chemical balance of those synapses. Every new skill you learn physically alters the architecture of those connections. The mind and the brain are inextricably, irreversibly one. There is no ghost in the machine.
That is just phenomenal. Let's zoom out and recap the incredible territory we've covered today.
Good idea.
We started by looking at a text that dared to permanently merge the invisible realm of psychology with the hard, microscopic reality of biology, using a strict interdisciplinary blueprint.
We saw how understanding anatomy, physiology, and molecular biology together is the only valid way to crack the code of the mind.
Exactly. From there, we mapped out the architecture. We learned that the brain is a highly specific grid where routing determines function, where the hardware for sight and sound are identical, but their wiring defines our reality.
Yeah, the homunculus map and all of that.
Right. Then we zoomed in to watch the actual mechanisms of that grid, the breathtaking stadium waves of sodium ions translating into chemical keys thrown across microscopic motes.
The universal language of the brain, constantly reshaping its own architecture through experience and learning.
And finally, we saw how that language scales up, how billions of simple binary cells firing together create the ultimate emergent property, the complex symphony of human consciousness.
It really does completely shift how you view yourself when you look in the mirror, doesn't it?
It does. You aren't just a person. You are a bustling, incredibly dynamic universe of biological mechanisms.
It is a perspective that is deeply grounding, rooting us entirely in the natural world, yet infinitely awe-inspiring.
Absolutely. But before we let you go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Ooh, okay.
We've spent our time learning that the human brain is essentially a biological machine driven by highly complex, but ultimately cause and effect cellular mechanism.
Right.
So if everything we are, every complex behavior, every fleeting thought, every deeply held belief is ultimately the result of these organized physical chemical reactions firing in a sequence, what does that mean for our sense of free will?
That is the great lingering question of neuroscience.
It really is. If we are entirely the product of our biology and chemistry, acting out the emergent properties of physical matter, well, who is really the one making the choices? Are we the ones riding the bicycle, or are we just the gears turning? Something to think about.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us on this conceptual deep dive into the blueprint of the mind. Keep asking those hard questions, keep exploring, and never stop marveling at that incredible 3-pound piece of machinery inside your own head.